Welcome, workers and friends, and welcome back to Working Class Revolt, revolutionary, anti-imperialist working class analysis. I'm your host, Dust James, the Marxist-Leninist truck driver, coming to you live out of my humble home in rural North Carolina. And I'm always glad to be joined with my great friend and comrade, union organizer out there in the land down under in Australia, David Fox. How things down there?
Well, I'm good today. Very actually pleasant spring day here in Bendigo in central Victoria. I hope everything's going well for you guys in the US.
Right on. So we are very thrilled to have a very honorable guest, a member of the Anti-Conquista Collective, Victor Coronado. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing a little under the weather, but otherwise, I'm all right.
All right. Well, we're very glad to have you with us. We're going to get right into the show. We format our show as the beginning of a old school communist work meeting, and in those meetings they would go through labor updates and news updates to set the tone for organizing. They talk about what are the bread and butter issues that the working class is facing on day to day and how to fight for better conditions. And we haven't been on here for a month, so we have a lot to go over. I'm going to start out. I want to talk a little bit about the COVID. Right now, there's been a resurgence. Kids are back in school. Some of the schools are shutting down. I'm out here in rural North Carolina, and people kind of gave up on the mask mandates for a while, and they came right back. I went into a workplace, as normal, and they're like, put the mask on or go outside. So it's coming back around again. Deaths have been rising after they've been falling. We have issues with anti-vaxxers. And we also have issues with inflation going on. I always say that liberal stimulus, without actually expanding the economy, can have good effects, but can also create inflation. Money only is the ability to buy off the physical economy. Without expanding the physical economy and pumping out more money, you will create inflation. And the conservatives like to talk about this. The liberals like to say it doesn't exist. But the communists understand on a material basis what an economy is. We got this so-called labor shortage, and it really is a shortage of employers refusing to pay decent wages. We have workers who would go in sick, who now can no longer go in sick because of COVID. We also have issues with childcare. Childcare is unavailable or even overpriced, which is causing some people to stay home and take care of their kids. Let's go over to why we're still talking about the U.S. Victor, maybe you could talk a little bit about yourself, your community, or any response to those issues that I just raised.
Am I muted?
Nope, you're good, man. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, good. Sorry, I thought I was muted. Yeah, well, so as I've mentioned probably too many times on the Anti-Conquista platform, I'm from a city, quote unquote metropolitan city in the state of New Jersey. The name of the city is called Perth Amboy. Overwhelmingly, it's over a population over 50,000. Per census data, I believe it's over 80% of the community is Latino, Latina. And so I'm no longer living in Perth Amboy, although I did a lot of organizing last year in Perth Amboy in the local election. Yeah, and I keep saying this is like this economy is a fake economy. What I mean by that is that at any given moment, whenever that next crisis is going to hit, you're going to see things similar to what you saw in 2008, 2007, 2008, or 2020. And I think there's over the last, I don't know how many years, there's studies that show that, if something were to happen with the economy, people basically have enough savings to live off of the saving for maybe 2-3 weeks or so tops. And so, when we were talking about working class folks, poor working class folks, and so, communities like where I was born and raised in Perth Amboy, you see this. You see people working 2, 3, sometimes 4 jobs just to make ends meet. You see people, renting, and I know people don't want to hear me say this sometimes in my community, but it's the truth. We have a lot of what's called illegal housing, where you have folks living in unauthorized living, so like basements and attics and stuff like that, where things are not caught up to, are not per local or even state, regulatory standards. So, what that means basically is like, just imagine a burning house, and you can't, you don't have the proper exits, right? You don't have you're not living under the right conditions, that usually, and that happens every once in a while. And that means people die. Right. So, I mean, there's so many layers to this, but you see how it impacts the community. It really is a fake economy. The economy works well for certain folks, right? But for a lot of poor and working class folks, it just doesn't. And people are living paycheck to paycheck, and people are doing what they can with what they got. You'll still see, even again in Perth Amboy, you still see long lines at the local churches that give away food on Sunday, so local pantries and stuff like that. You'll see all that. And so this is very much a fake economy. It works well for some folks. We know that, but by and large, the majority of American workers, this economy is not working for them. I can't. I'm gonna be honest. I can't. I always like to keep it real, and I'm gonna just say, I'll say this and then I'll stop there. But maybe we can get into it later when you interview me or whatever. But I grew up dirt poor. I used to be ashamed of that, and now it's just it's the reality, right? I grew up on welfare, food stamps, for over a decade and a half. As a child, and then I've always just been part of like the poor working class. Luckily for me now, I in 2015 I did start working for a public utility company with a very strong union, which at the time didn't have a lot of black or brown workers, right? And so now you're seeing a bunch of us slowly trickle in, and you do see, and it's interesting. The response is interesting because a lot of the white workers are seeing this as like, whoa, where are all these people coming from? And that public utility company does pay well because of our union. We have a strong union. And so my reality is a lot different than what it was when I was, 34 years old and up until I was born. Right. So but I hope that was a sufficient response.
Thank you, brother. David Fox, I understand that you got some difficulties down there within the union movement in Australia. Maybe you can fill us in on a little bit of the details.
Well, yeah, look, 2 weeks ago, I mean, it's obviously actually started about 3 weeks ago. The Andrews Labor government here basically came out of nowhere. Actually, it was via the Chief Health Officer, advised that we had to shut lunch facilities that on construction sites, and it required that everyone in the construction sector is now required to have a jab or to have a vaccination against COVID. Consequently, later that week, obviously everyone moved all their tables and chairs out in the streets, and microwaves and ovens, and locked them up. There's all stuff. If we can't use the facilities, we'll use the street. Locked everything up there, and that was actually supported by their by their main union, the CFMEU, Construction, Forestry, Mining, and Energy Union, and no doubt the other construction unions involved as well. Then on the following, then the next month, the following Monday, what happened? a lot of union members were trying to find answers or where we're going to move forward from here. Basically, first of all, closing down the facilities, which was a hard one, facilities that were many years ago. From people in the from union members in the construction industry that fought really hard battles to have all those basic facilities, seeing it all shut down. And obviously, I think it also triggered off as like now everyone required to have a compulsory jab, mandatory jab. Now, obviously, there was some calls through, some shop stewards and members went up to the union office, wanted to have some dialogue and answers and talk to the secretary. But the problem we had there after that, had looked better and reports back. All of a sudden, because they must have been communicating over social media, look, we're going to head up there. Next thing you know, all these other groups have sort of jumped on the bandwagon. Next thing, and boom, and the message came out. And I think from a real right-wing libertarian movement called Freedom Australia, was grab a vest, head up there, and show your stuff, and basically it turned into an angry scene after that. I think it's a combination thing. There was workers' anger about where everything was going at the same time as one thing and trying to give it direction. But what we also saw, all these other groups are opportunistically trying to actually harness that anger and then give it a different direction. And they jumped on there, which led into the end result of attacking the union office, smashing the front doors in and everything else. And then the riot police were called in and shooting off the special, I think it was like a capsicum bullets and other things as well, and projectiles. There were a lot of people that turned up there that weren't union members. They were associated or members of these far right libertarian groups, but also of the far right in general as well, trying to harness that anger to direct it to an anti-union, anti-working class agenda. The place was a mess. It was I had to shut the union office down. Unfortunately, from that, about 4 or 5 people that work in their union were diagnosed with COVID after that. They had to go in quarantine, and of course, obviously, all the officials now being told to quarantine for 14 days, isolate and get tested and stuff, which is a disadvantage to workers in the industry. But from that, the state government then announced, right, we're shutting the construction industry down for 2 weeks. Everyone's got time to get a jab. Mind you, a lot of people have already had the jab anyway. But then it escalated from there on to the following day. It's quite a mixed mash of everybody. 3,000 people turned up to another anti-vax, anti-mandatory jab rally the following day. And basically, the actual organisers of the event never showed up. They actually hide behind social media. And obviously, you have all these grifters like the RVM, who's a right-wing libertarian. He's got this Rebel News channel, calls himself a journalist. He's not. And others are filming it. And it basically led to a march throughout the city, into clashes with the police, and on top of it also occupation of the Westgate Bridge in Melbourne. But during the week, there were rallies all over. But I think they just disintegrated because really, in a lot of ways, when I look at it, there's no actual proper demands besides fuck Dan Andrews, their premier, every day, which will be back every day, and no jab. But really, there's no concrete and no actual concrete demands as well. And obviously, there was a lot of discussions throughout for many circles about moving forward. There's obviously, from anti-fascist circles right through to Marxist-Leninist ones, a lot of opinions and stuff. But I think actually what this needs is some good and Marxist-Leninist leadership again in this to obviously guide workers through. Because I mean, if there's anger out there, it's usually over the economic conditions that's affecting them. And there's just no certainty at all. No one knows where we're going to get out of this properly and moving forward. Whatever economic certainty is ahead, and obviously there's a lot of anger. But the thing is, this is where it's vitally important to apply it. Now, I'm a little bit passionate about things because it was pretty intense. I mean, even up here for regional areas, they're sort of looking over our shoulders every 5 seconds. Everyone in the unions were actually on high alert. And that it was pretty tense, especially in Melbourne City itself. It was like the air was thick, the sword, what's going on here and everything else. And I think at the end of the day, it's also too, what we have to see this as is a systematic attack on the working class, the working class organisations such as unions. And unions are not perfect. We will recognise that, and they have their limitations. We recognise that, but we also understand too that, well, look, at the end of the day, it's just sitting back, right? And I know there's been some disparaging comments and that from others, and I'm not going to mention names, but I mean, at the end of the day, we'll say, well, look, it's great being on the outside looking in and living in a state and far away looking in, but they're not involved. And I put the call out, myself and a couple others put the call out to all Marxist-Leninists, even though we're a minority, small group, but we need to start banding together and sort of providing some way forward here and get involved in this. There's only few and far between us involved in the unions as well. So that's why it's vitally important. The thing is, what's interesting though with the unions, I mean, with the construction unions in the one I'm involved in, we're actually not supporting mandatory vaccination. We encourage, it's a lot, but we want to make people make their own informed choice. And the thing is, like I would say to anyone, even on these shows, if you've got an issue with the vaccine, for Christ's sakes, go and see the doctor. Go and see your doctor. Don't go researching on the internet. Go and talk to your own doctor. They'll know what's best for you. And obviously, an answer to your concerns there or a medical professional. But at the end of the day, we're in one hell of a lot of trouble, and the powers that be using this to advantage to try and smash us even further and keep us divided. And look, I can also understand too, from the health workers' point of view, if you happen to be a nurse and all that, working in the hospitals, they don't want to be put into a situation where all of a sudden there's just they can't treat everybody anymore, and they're going to have to start prioritising certain treats, like I'm hearing from the US, from the states of Mississippi and Alabama, where people are vaccinated are getting preferential treatment because they've got greater chance of survival than those that haven't been. And obviously, they don't want to be put into a situation here. Now, our health system's on the verge of it just won't be able to handle it if we set for such an influx of people who have been deeply affected with COVID. I do understand that. But the fact is, it also raises the question: why I'm about to swear my head off there, but anyway, why is it then governments are mandatory? Okay, we need to invest heavily in healthcare here, big time. We're going to need to build new hospitals. Take a leaflet out of what China did. We're going to build a hospital within 10 days and do it. If you happen to come down with COVID, we can get you into a hospital. Even if you might have mild symptoms, you got 24-hour medical care. We can treat you and start training people and start investing. Because the last 40 years here in Australia, all we heard in our healthcare is wards closing down, hospitals closing down, hospitals being privatised. I mean, for Christ's sake, you had a private hospital next door to a public one. Why do we need private hospitals? Seriously. And even with our aged care facilities, it should be back under public ownership. So they've got proper, genuine healthcare. And I think that's got to be the way we've got to put forward. It's not about getting into an argument on these unnecessary arguments about being locked down. And I think we need to actually get back in and say, hey, fuck this neoliberal shit. We need to get major back investment into public hospitals. And figuring to Australia, I'm not too sure what's like in the US. We do have an aging population. And so it's critical, instead of leaving it up to the private sector, whose their interest is to make profit, not for our healthcare. We should get back under public ownership, and I think that's vitally important. But also too, with a lot of workers out there that are angry and disillusioned. Well, if you want to do something, start getting even to do something. If you're concerned about direction of the union, get involved in it then, and do something about it. Because basically what's happening here, the powers that be want to destroy powerful unions in this country, such as CFMU and many others out there. They want to destroy it and leave us completely divided and weak, so they can further and further and further trying to exploit it. And last thing, and I'm calling out for all Marxist-Leninists in this country, we've got absolutely no choice but to be involved in union and get back onto the front line of the class struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother. Maybe I can break it down. That was quite a bit to handle for our viewers. So my understanding is that that the state came down and said mandatory vaccines in the construction industry, which would have put some workers out of a job for a week that hadn't got it, created a tense situation. And when they rightfully striked, because the capitalists will use any situation for their benefit. They never let a good crisis go bad. And they use the situation with COVID to further stick it to the union and stick it to the workers. And the workers rightfully got mad. And then it was further co-opted by the right wing and even, I would say, fascist forces. And they were fascist forces because who did they attack? Did they attack the government? No, they immediately convinced angry workers to attack their own union hall. And here in the South, where we barely have any union representation and we have less wages, it's an absolute disgusting insult. We also don't have health care in this country. So even though we have worse conditions in a lot of places, specifically Midwest and the South and the inner city, we might have worse conditions. We don't have health care. We go on strike. We lose our health care. So that's another thing stopping U.S. workers from being able to successfully fight back. And it's the union movement in Australia that has gotten people those rights. And I think this is a sad show. And I think you're taking exactly the correct position of defend the workers, support their means, and have them focus at the real targets, which is the neoliberal government, which is trying to attack them and their unions. I know there was a lot to go through. Victor,
can I just
go ahead.
Further too? At 1 o'clock on Friday afternoon, our time here. Actually, I was in the meeting, but I didn't know until well after it that the state government, the chief health officer under the state of emergencies now said there's got to be another 1.25 million workers now must get mandatory jab. They're essential workers. So you happen to work in essential work, could be happening. You work in a supermarket, you can work in other industries, and that you need to now get a mandatory jab by 15th of October, and then by the 26th of November to be fully vaxxed. So obviously, it's there's one backlash against that, which amongst the anti-vax crowd, but we'll see how that pans out as well. But look, on that, a lot of people have already had their first jab. Like we were just talking before, Australia-wide, I think, or in Victoria alone, I think about 50.6 people, 50.6% of population are now fully jabbed. So it's we'll just see how this pans out, but it is obviously there's court cases involved as well and other things. I can't comment because basically we're not getting as much information at the moment. We'll see how that pans out. But the most important thing is we need to direct all that anger towards basic capitalism itself, all the neoliberal shit they've been throwing down our throats for the last 40 years, and it's time to get united and have a fair, consistent fight back against it.
I just want to make it quite clear that the Working Class Revolt asks people to consult their medical professionals. We are in no way anti-vax whatsoever. A lot of the reason why the union was against the mandate is because you need if I'm correct, you have to be fully vaccinated. Once you get the first vaccine, you got to wait a month. And so this was going to put workers, a month out of work. A lot of workers, which is, a horrible demand to put on the people. Let's go on to Victor. I know this is a lot to take in, Victor. This is a complicated situation, but from what you just heard, is there any response before we go on?
No, well, in all that you were saying, and by the way, I am no expert in Australian politics. I know very little about Australian politics, so I'm gonna defer to you on anything going on in Australia, and I'm here to listen and learn as well. I don't know why this. When we talked about you mentioned the fascists. So are these? You said these are fascist workers?
No, not necessarily. No, and most of them. There's also too the libertarian, right-wing libertarian elements out. There's groups they basically found themselves on being anti-Islam, anti all sorts of things, But they're really at the end of the day, they're actually outright anti-working class.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So
I was trying to figure out the makeup of
just on it. There are fascist groups involved, obviously, but it's also to the right wing.
I'm sorry.
If I could clear it up for Victor, what happened was the workers were going to have a demonstration, and then masses of these libertarians and fascists showed up.
Yeah. No, I understood that part. Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious about the makeup of those folks. But I was just going to say this, and at some point you said something about us making sure that, I guess, something along the lines of that we have strong unions, and I agree. I say it's unbelievable. So this is my only 2 cents on everything you said. And by the way, it's just something that popped in my mind based off of some of the stuff that you said there. The anti-union sentiment to me is just bizarre to me. I mean, it's crazy how you can get people to really, again, just work against their own self-interest. Like we have, again, I'm in a very strong union, strong in the sense of not on social justice issues, not on the issues of racial justice, if you will, and things like that, or even feminism, but on economics, it's very good. It's amazing. And on protecting workers' rights and stuff like that's amazing. But even like that, we have people in our union, in the union that I'm in, that are anti-union. And I have to sit there and I have to say that, do you realize how much money you make? And I say to them, do you understand if you were, in a different work, doing the same work that you're doing now at a, what do they call that here in Jersey? I'm forgetting the term, but at-will employee, at-will employee. They call these workers at-will employees, but basically means that the corporation, the company could fire you at will at any given point. You sign a contract. I've been an at-will employee before. No union. They don't want you to talk about that union stuff or try to organize people to make them, form a union. And I tell people, I'm like, do you understand that you're making, some of these people are making over $100,000, $150,000 a year. And they have all these union protections with great benefits and everything like that. And it's almost impossible to get fired because of how strong our union is, because it fights for our workers and making sure that people don't get fired. And if they do get fired, there's a grievance process. People a lot of times end up coming back. And it's mind boggling on me how people even within the union, within the strong union that we have, are anti-union. It's just, and that's a growing sentiment here overall in the United States. And it's no coincidence that, for the most part, wages over the last, 30, 40 years haven't really gone up for the average American worker, while union membership continues to decline. Now they're going after public, the capitalists are going after now public sector unions. So, I just had to get that out of there, so, just if you're against the idea of collective bargaining, that doesn't make any sense to me at all. So if you're a worker, you have to be regardless of all the trust me, I could name you plenty of them. As a brown man, as a Latino, there are plenty of contradictions within the unions. We still have to be pro-union. I mean, it's one of those things. I just don't. It's a weird thing that the capitalists have been able to do, to be able to psychologically condition people to be against unions, against their own self-interest. It's mind-boggling.
Well, very good. We're going to get into news updates. I like to start in the oppressed world and move on to the super exploited world, starting with the U.S. We're going to talk about some legislation issues that have been going on. And, I'll just start it out. We know that capitalist politics are little more than a sideshow to keep you supporting the enemies of the capitalist system. Continue to support your own oppression. Now, the first one that happened is the government shutdown, the so-called government shutdown. Now, we've been through, this comes up every year, and then they even linger it out, and maybe they have it go a few months before they let it come up next year. But essentially, all that the hype and the threat of a government shutdown is to impose further austerity. Now, we had a government shutdown under Trump, and a government shutdown does not mean that they shut down the entire federal government. A government shutdown means that the military stays up, the police stays up, but they stop providing public services, and well-unionized, well-paid workers are out of a job or furloughed for several months. So the government shutdown itself is austerity. And so they threaten, hey, you got to lower the budget. Or you got to raise the debt ceiling. So there's this mad scramble to cut public services. And they say, if you don't cut public services, all these government workers are going to be out of work the next few months. And it's a strategy. They use it over and over and over again. And that Democrats like to act like they're against the shutdown, they're against the shutdown that, but then they give into austerity measures, so-called give in, that they were on board to do the whole damn time. So it kind of like saves the Democrats' face. And then they make this weird like down talking to the workers, saying, oh, it's like your house, we're in credit card debt, we got to cut it. What they don't tell you is the U.S. spends more on military than almost all the other countries combined. So they can always have money for war, they can always have money for a police state, but they can never give us health care, education. Further austerity is a way of maintaining class and national oppression. Denying public service to our black and brown brothers and sisters, as well as the whole working class in general. And don't believe the hype for a minute. The Democrats are not on your side. Just continue to demand that they cut these massive imperialist military budgets, and they fund the people who build and work and move the trucks and move the goods and get stuff done. Make sure we have our public services and defend those. Let's see, Victor's out there in the U.S. Any response to that issue?
No, you hit it on the head with the military-industrial complex. It's not just that; it's intelligence as well. I forget the exact number, but folks can Google this and look this up. There's like trillions of dollars. I think it was in the trillions of dollars over the last 40 years has been unaccounted for in discretionary spending. The intelligence community they get blank checks, and they don't know what the fuck they do with this money. Nobody knows where the money goes. Nobody knows what they're doing with the money. There's no oversight. So who knows what the fuck the CIA and the NSA and all these people are doing? So this idea, every time when people get caught up in this Democrat versus Republican thing, this idea, the Republicans say, well, let's go through the budget with a, what do they say, with a fine comb or whatever. But they fail to mention that they're for pro big government, for the military, for the police, for the intelligence. In obscene number, it's obscene. It doesn't even make any logical sense. The amount of money that we spend per capita on all this stuff, especially when it comes to intelligence, which again they get this discretionary spending. It's just blank checks. Nobody knows what happens with this money. There's some money accounted for, and then there's just tons of money out there that over the last 30, 40 years, no one knows what the hell happened to this money. It's like, how is that possible? So this idea that we don't have the money for infrastructure, for public services, for healthcare, for science, for education, it's bullshit. It's complete bullshit. And you're right. The two-party system, right? They get us caught up in these talking points, and people buy into that stuff. And it's just a facade. It's just a game. It's a game of smoke and mirrors. And the moment you get caught up in the Democrat versus Republican talking point, like, okay, if you're a Democrat, this is what you're supposed to say, and if you're a Republican, this is what you're supposed to say. That's why we're having this podcast. That's why Marxists, Leninists, and communists need to go out, need to preach the gospel of what it is that we understand, how we understand the system, because we have we don't fuck with either of the parties, right? So again, you hit it on the head. People really need to pay attention to that right there. The fact that we're an empire and they have no money, no problem spending obscene amounts of money that we can't even account for in war, in quote unquote intelligence, and again, even militarizing our own communities. But yet we have no, quote unquote, we don't have any money for all this other stuff that we need. It's just it's crazy.
Let's see, David Fox, any quick response?
Well, it's not so dissimilar here in Australia. And actually, this is a good flow on from what we were talking about before, because what they've been using under the situation with lockdowns and shutting the industry down is also, too, what we're seeing Australia is heading towards a low-wage police state and a prison industrial complex as well, thrown on with the military-industrial complex. We'll talk a little bit more about AUKUS later on, the submarines, but what I'm saying is our defence budget is it's an unlimited checkbook. It's open checkbook, anything. But also too funding of the police and prisons as well. And it all coincides. And I'm not looking at all this. I've just got to take a step back myself and have a look at what's the dialectical relation, what's the internal, what's happening externally, and what they're basically doing. Where Australia is turning us into a low-wage police state, prison industrial complex, but the military industrial complex as well. Well, look what's happening externally as well. around the world and just putting us on a war footing all the time. So put us in that consistent state of fear and war in such a way that basically if you do speak something different, well, then you all of a sudden got a target on your back. And obviously, we've got ASIO here, which is equivalent to your CIA. And basically, there's money that goes disappearing. No one knows what's happened to it. There's decisions made behind closed doors. No one wants to talk about. In fact, the federal government, the Morrison government, wants to put a bill through that any cabinet decision doesn't have to be open at all. It can be done in secret. That's basically what it is. So no one knows what's going on. Fortunately, I mean, some aspects, some senators are saying we're not going to support this and it'll probably be destroyed. But everything's sort of done in secret behind closed doors. Nothing's held accountable, and besides money, but everything else, other decision. And at the end of the day, it's like it's all of a sudden this is what you're seeing is further. And when people go about democratic rights, well, unfortunately, you're not going to have a say because decisions are made behind closed doors. And who's making these decisions? Who's involved? What's happening? No one knows anymore. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, we're in this situation, and this is actually a very big cause of concern. So yeah, we're definitely with you with that one as well.
All right, so every time I hear the word military industrial complex and prison industrial complex, I got to do a little bit of a talk on it from a larger anti-imperialist perspective. Now, a lot of the liberals will like to tell you it is the military contractors that create the necessity for war. You know, they want more money, they push for the war, they line their pockets. Same thing, and people like to overhype the private prisons as well, which is actually a small portion of the larger prison industrial complex. It's my understanding from an anti-imperialist perspective that the reason why we had that, yes, these are issues, and yes, this is a contributing factor, but the reason why we have these things is to maintain national class and national oppression. The reason why we have a large prison complex, it doesn't actually benefit society overall to have that prison. It is to keep poor black and brown people down and criminalized and keep them in lower wage and be able to extract money from them while they're in prison and then extract more money from them after they get out of jail. That's why they exist. Same thing with the military industrial complex. Yes, there's people lining their pockets, but at the end of the day, it is to keep those countries from developing, to keep those countries in poverty. That way, the U.S. can offer and other countries can offer IMF loans, impose austerity boards, not allow them to grow, and so on and so forth, and keep them in a state of national oppression. I like to put that out there. If there's no response to that specific comment, I'll go on to the next one.
I just have one thing to add to that.
Go ahead.
The United States is, and that's my 120-pound Rottweiler. I apologize. The United States can proudly claim to be the number one in two categories when it comes to prisons: highest prison population and highest prison rate. It doesn't even, when we talk about dictatorships, right? The United States wants to always portray itself as the beacon of democracy and all that, and freedom and all that. Doesn't make any sense that we have the highest prison rate and the highest prison population in the world. And we make dictatorships, real quote unquote dictatorships in other places look like, and I'm not talking about the places we defend. I'm talking about other places, but like it just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense when we talk about the majority of these people being black and brown. It's just again, and I come from one of these urban communities where a lot of I got a good friend right now who's locked up, and it becomes this vicious cycle. These folks become rehabilitated, right? They come out, did your time, and then you go apply for a job, and then no one wants to give you an opportunity anymore, right? So now what do people do? They go back into the underground market, right? Into the black market and start doing something else or what they were doing before. It's just this vicious cycle. So I just want to add that part to it. We could do a whole segment on that. It's the whole prison. I don't even like the term. It doesn't do enough justice to what the fuck's going on within, especially within and this affects poor white folks too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, just had to add that.
Very powerful point. So we're going to go on to the next news issue, and this is the Build Back Better $3 trillion. Oh, wow. There's a big dollar. All right, here we go. So we're going to go on to the next news item, the Build Back Better $3 trillion infrastructure bill. What they're not telling you about this bill, it is $3 trillion over 10 years. And what they're also not telling you is they gave, I think it was $4 or $5 trillion if you added the numbers. They at the beginning of March, a few years back, and they had the initial response to COVID. They gave the banks $4 or $5 trillion to bail them out, and now we're talking about we're talking about almost 2 years later. They're going to give us a $3 trillion infrastructure that's crumbling over a period of 10 years. That is absolutely disgusting. Too little bit, too late. And in this $3 trillion over 10 years, a lot of it is simply handouts to contractors, hands out to contractors that are friendly. It's a further bailout of the rich. It doesn't hit in poor neighborhoods and black and brown neighborhoods. The infrastructure is not going where it needs to go. It's basically a way of saying they're putting infrastructure. It's another bailout for the corporations. That is what capitalism does. Capitalism will save the rich every time. And this falling empire, it will allow everything to fall down as long as this small group of monopoly capitalists continue their profits. That's all they care about. And they're allowing the infrastructure to completely fall down. This infrastructure bill is too little bit, too late, and they can't even get it to pass. And they say they're coming up against the Republican opposition, but just like Obama took the public option off the table, their negotiation skills are purposely horrible because they're all about saving face, getting voted for, and not actually helping the people. This infrastructure bill is a sham. And also in this bill, which is bail out the corporations and bail out the contractors, is a hidden, I watched this on the Convo couch, is a hidden mileage. A proposed regressive mileage tax that will hit rural workers and workers who have to travel, similar to the gas tax in France, which created a workers' uprising in France, the Yellow Vest movement. So there is regressive taxes hidden in this bill. This bill was just given to the legislators, and they're supposed to put yes or no, and they battle back and forth, and the bridges are crumbling. What's going on? Well, Victor, I know you stepped out there to bring your dog in, but you got any response to this specific issue?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I don't have any I don't have much comment on this particular issue. I haven't read too much about the particular issue. I know some of my friends were sending me these videos of the Republicans I guess holding up the bill because it was very lengthy and wordy and whatnot. And my response to that to my friends were like, that's the job. That's their job, is to go through this stuff. Like I don't feel any pity for any of these congressmen. But anyways, as far as the infrastructure bill, the little bit that I do know about about the bill, and again, I haven't read the bill. I don't think any normal person on the outside is gonna read the bill because it is so lengthy. But it's just the part that worries me is there's a lot of talks about privatizing a lot of this work that will be done. And again, as a union guy, as a communist, so I work for a public utility company. Our big thing is that we always try to keep all the jobs in house, and not just for reasons of self-preservation and there's part of that. I'm not going to lie. But also, we notice a trend every single time something gets privatized in the industry that I'm in. And that's that we hire someone or a company that really doesn't have the standards that our workers have. and the quality is just not the same at all. And what ends up happening is that the service suffers. And so this is just that's the constant theme. And besides another thing is that anytime now you start introducing privatized work, and especially if it's non-unionized work, that drives the labor down, right? In terms of what's the word I'm looking for? I'm sorry, I'm sick tonight. I'm a little off tonight, but basically the labor wages get driven down once you start privatizing certain work. And some people say, well, it's okay. No, it's not okay. You never want that. At the very least, you want another labor union to be able to do the job, so we can again continue to increase the labor wages. But that's the part that from a little bit I know that worries me. If is all this talk about privatizing, certain work that shouldn't be private, that should be in the hands of collective bargaining of union workers.
Yeah.
See, Comrade Fox, anything to add before we move on?
Well, I think it's good discussion talking about privatisation, because we've had rampant privatisation for many years here in Australia, both on the local, state and federal level, on many things. And the fact is, we're looking at, say, construction sector, for example. When it used to be all major public infrastructure and public works, it was actually done by the respective government department. At the time, if there was extra work needed to be done and they couldn't fulfil it, then they'd bring a private company in, but they had to meet the terms and requirements of the department and greater. But now what we're seeing the other way around. Now we're going to have private companies building everything, which is quite the common norm for us here in Australia. And basically, too, about the billions of dollars that can be wasted. I'll give you a classic example: the Westgate Tunnel project here in Melbourne. Now, there was a big dispute because there's contaminated soil, I think, with PFC contamination within the soil. Now, the main contractor that's got that was awarded the project is blaming either Westconnex, which is one that owns the infrastructure, which is all owned by the big banks behind them, or the state government. So you've got three people, three organisations, basically all trying to have a fight. Whose fault is it to clean up, and whose responsibility, is to clean up, etc. And it's been prolonging this, or it's been delaying the project for such time. But it's costing actually ordinary taxpayers, ordinary working class people, more money in the long term while they're sorting this mess out. I believe the dust has settled and they're slowly starting to move forward, but it's cost us a lot of money in between. But this is the problem. It was still directly, public ownership from the start. They might be able to deal with this better. Okay, there's a problem here. We've got contaminated soil, etc. When we can put the respective authorities into place, motions into place to deal with it, instead of having this legal shit fight between who's doing what, whose responsibility. And that's just one example. But the other thing too about some of the newer projects we've got, sometimes I even question it. It's great to create work, and I'm not doing that if it's good paying work. But why we all of a sudden need to build some of this was when the fact is all we're doing is keeping these companies just going. If they don't have a contract within a year or two, they seem to go belly up. So we have to find something for them to build all the time. And I think there's really no actual central planning, no proper planning in place. Was what do we actually need to put forward, and what we don't necessarily need in the meantime. I mean, I can understand, yes, there's certain things have to be upgraded, things have to be fixed, from railways to bridges, roads, and other public infrastructure and public works that needs to be critically done, and they should be prioritised in some times. But when you've got other construction going on, why? There's just no planning in it. It's just like, let's build it for speculation, whatever, to make more profit. And really, people like ourselves here are not actually benefiting at all from it. Yeah, there might be a short benefit, as we know with the construction project. It's only short term. But once it's over, it's over. Yeah, back to square one. Those workers have got to look for new work, etc. And then we've got to try and find new sources or projects to build from. So, we can totally get what's happening here. But I mean, I can't comment on the bill in the US Congress or Senate. I don't know. I wouldn't know the details in that at all. But look, to me, it's just like, well, we've got similar situation here, so it's not all surprising either. But regardless of it's here for us, it's Labor or Liberal, it wouldn't matter. They're the two cheeks of the same backside. They're just doing their job. So they're just doing their job, and I think we've got to get out of that argument and actually probably look at a proper class analysis and see what's really going on here and who's benefiting from what. And usually at the end of the day, it's usually your multinationals, etc., that be the ones that would be benefiting, not the common people.
All right, so we've been out almost a month. We had a study last week. And actually, we took off last week. We did a study the week before that. So it's been almost a month since we've been out. So I'm sorry if this is old news to people, but we really got to bring this up. There was a controversy that was actually made the news on immigration. And that was the images of federal officers, the Border Patrol in Texas on horseback with what appeared to be, lassos, or people were calling it whips, up in the air, running these people, black people, Haitians, out of the country. And the image immediately came up with, this looks just like slavery. And there was this huge controversy. Well, were they whips? Were they whipping them? People saying it was split reins. I actually did look into it, and I think there was some separate whips, and there was all kinds of stuff. But what this whole thing is not getting to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is imperialism, which is the system. So let's talk about the history of Haiti. Haiti was the first successful slave revolt. The United States and Europe never forgave them for that, have been attacking them and keeping them in poverty ever since. Notable incident that happened in the last few decades was the overthrow elected leader Aristide by the Clintons, another Democrat that was in office. So I mean, Democrat, Republican, it's imperialism. So the United States and the imperialist forces have kept Haiti in poverty. And every time they try to democratically elect a government to change the needs for the people, they go in there and they shut them down. And they half the wages and they keep them in poverty and keep them exploiting. So it's no wonder why people are fleeing there to begin with. So let's talk about the crisis on the border and immigration. Trump used COVID to shut down the border against international law. There is an international law that says, if people are fleeing and are, they flee, they're fear for their lives, they're fleeing a horrible situation, the U.S. has to let them in and allow them refugee status. So they're breaking international law by shutting down the borders. Trump started this. It started because of the COVID, and that it continued with the Biden administration. They like to overhype and say, Biden reversed his policy. No, he didn't. Biden has been fighting to keep the policy of shutting down the border. And what this has created is mass makeshift refugee camps all along the border. And we got people in horrible situations being preyed upon by, drug cartels and criminal organizations using U.S. guns whose money is being laundered by the United States. And you just have a horrible, disgusting humanitarian issue that is created by U.S. imperialism. And this is not what they're talking about. They like to talk about, was it a whip? Won't it a whip? We support our border patrol. No, we don't support. You're not getting the whole story if you don't look at this from materialist, anti-imperialist perspective. So, I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. It exposes both the parties. I've been using this to work with some of my Democratic contacts. Even them are like, damn, this is fucked. These are federal agents. And they're sitting here beating down black folks. And it's obvious that you can see it. And you can look at this. You go back and they really are. I made this. They really are the slave patrol of today. I mean, if you look at it from I know slavery was, about human rights, and we got to talk about that. Slavery is disgusting, but slavery was an economic condition of workers, and people were fleeing an economic condition to the north to find a slightly better economic condition, and the slave patrol brought them right back on down. And that is the same material thing that the Border Patrol accomplishes. It takes workers fleeing worse conditions created by imperialism and pushes them back down into those conditions. They really are the slave of today. It's sadly discussed. And what I did was I was able to talk with some of the Democratic supporters and get them to start to see some of the outright bullshit that the Biden administration is doing. Victor, maybe you can comment on this as well. I know if folks want to check out his show, Conquista, they had a great segment on this recently.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you touched on a lot there. I would echo a lot of those sentiments. I mean, immigration is an important issue for the Latino community. There's 60 million Latinos here in the United States. I guess the last estimate is, I think, 13 or 14 million undocumented people in the United States, something around that. You can't go into you go to any restaurant, you go to a lot of local businesses, and who's back there making the food or serving folks, and it's a lot of undocumented folks, and I know, I speak to them and I ask them, so where you from? And then I speak Spanish, so yo le pregunto, I ask them the question, so you're here, what's your status, if you don't mind me asking? I'm Latino, just tell me, and we just talk. And a lot of folks are, that's what it's this the English only, the nativist sentiment. It's just such a weird thing. It makes zero sense on a land that's stolen, in a nation of immigrants. You touched on a lot there. From a third worldist perspective, we talked a little bit about this the last time you and I spoke. We're all the raw materials. They're in places like Africa and Latin America. Where are the productive forces? Go ahead. Next time you put on a shirt, go check out the label. See where it's made. Mexico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Guatemala, Nicaragua, etc., etc. So where are the productive forces? They're in places like Latin America, right? And so, yeah, you can't. It's the capitalist press. They have their talking points. It's microwave news. And no one talks about, imperialism. No one talks about the legacy of colonialism. It's these talking points that people, again, you get caught up in the Democrat versus Republican talking points. And that's not a good way to look at it. And as far as the images, I said this on our program at the Conquista. I had a hard time actually clicking on any of the articles as I was getting my news alerts, because you would get the news alert and you would see the image. And so the image itself was just, it made it very hard for me to just click on the article itself, because it was a lot. That was rough. That image was really, that was rough. And yeah, that's the first thing you think about is slavery, right? So for me, it was emotionally tough to me to actually get to an art. I finally started reading some of the articles, but it was just tough I literally went days without being able to click on an article because of the image. It was just too much. But yeah, I mean, Obama was a deporter in chief. He deported millions of undocumented folks, millions of Latinos. The Democrats use Latinos every 4 years with the issue of immigration. They never do anything about it. And it is something, another layer to this that's interesting. It's interesting that Americans can go pretty much anywhere, right? Same thing with folks from the UK, Australia. You could and what's the racial makeup? For the most part of these countries, right? There's a certain amount of privilege that folks have from the first world, whereas third world folks, who are, again, who are the producers of our material reality, can't migrate. They can't, just forget about making a political issue. They just can't get up and go. Like you can't. It's not allowed. So yeah, imperialism is a motherfucker, and it's and you have and United Nations. We at the last episode that we did Anticonquista, we focused on the speeches at the United Nations, and you're seeing this revolutionary movement in Latin America, the socialist movement in Latin America, Latin American leaders asserting themselves, and they're saying a lot, and they're saying and doing a lot of things that are fascinating, and people need to pay attention because the world is changing. China has major influence in Latin America. China is a great partner of Latin America. And Latin America, little by little, is not taking the United States shit anymore. It's not taking the empire shit anymore. And that's a good thing. And that's and so the idea for me as a third worldist, as a Latino, as a brown man living in the United States, there's 60 million Latinos. Now I get it. Not every Latino, trust me, a lot of us are very socially conservative, politically conservative, but my hopes are that at some point we're going to have a revolutionary nationalist movement of Latinos that are going to be able to link in with that movement that's happening in Latin America. And it's undeniable, and it's a moving train that you can't stop. I feel terrible for all these folks that are at the border, that at the end of the day, again, just remove ideology out of it, remove politics out of it for just a second. Folks are just trying, they understand what I know, which is that the material conditions are better here in the United States. And so folks are coming to the United States, think about it logically. It just makes a lot of sense that folks from Africa, like Africans will be traveling up north, right? And that Latin Americans will be also traveling up north. And when we put that into the context of colonialism and imperialism, it just makes and geography, it just makes a lot of sense that these people would be doing this, right? And so I don't blame these people. Someone gave me a weird talking point recently, said, look at the makeup of some of these people, and I think these are people who are, some of these people are, what Fidel would call gusanos, and if they're from certain places, but we don't look without having any data. We don't know. So we can make all these presumptions about these folks. And I'm not talking about specifically about the folks from Haiti. I'm just saying, someone was saying, well, these people who are coming from Venezuela, Nicaragua. I mean, yeah, granted, we know in Nicaragua there's some stuff happening there. We get that. And so some of those people do need to leave. But just overall, the issue of immigration is an issue of you can't talk about immigration in the United States without talking about the legacy of colonialism and today's global economy and what imperialism does, and how the global capitalist system and how that impacts the third world and in Latin America and the Caribbean. And then just one last thing, the Haitian people, the Latin Americans have an unpaid debt to Haiti. Haitians not only helped in terms of human resources, but material resources and arms that were given to fight for independence. When we're talking about the independence, when Latin Americans were fighting for their independence from the colonial master, Spain, and including, I just recently learned this, that in the Grito de Lares in Puerto Rico, towards the latter part of the 19th century, the Haitians had so many leftover arms that they gave some of those arms. They donated some of those arms to Puerto Rican independence fighters who were trying to fight for Puerto Rican independence. The Haitian people deserve 100% solidarity from all Latin Americans. And I say this, I'm a Dominican. So I don't know if you folks know about the whole Dominican versus Haitian thing, which is bullshit. It's bullshit. It's based off of a lot of ignorance. Because if you have a communist perspective, internationalist perspective, you understand that, and the political party that I'm associated with in the Dominican Republic, we stand in solidarity with the Haitian community, the Haitian immigrant community that's in the Dominican Republic. So as a Dominican American, as a Latin American, as a person from the Caribbean, I stand 100% in solidarity with the Haitian folks, and they're right they're their right to as they continue to fight for political self-determination. I mean, they deserve 100% solidarity from all of us.
Hmm. Very powerful, brother. Very glad we have you to discuss this important topic. Comrade Fox, anything to add?
Well, actually, I remember actually seeing some of the pictures on social media, and they were deplorable. And I'm glad they actually made those comparisons to slavery, and I'd love your insight in that too, Victor. That was really appreciated that. I mean, we're in Australia here. I mean, look, Australia, although a different situation here, but we've had a long history too of people seeking refuge here, of locking them up. We've had offshore detention in Nauru, on Manus Island, and basically privatised. They're talking about privatisation too, in locking them up in detention centres which are privately owned. And these refugees have been involved in from countries where Australia's had direct conflict, bit or indirect. Afghanistan's a classic example, but also too a lot of places West Asia like Iraq and many others as well, seeking refuge, and they're seeking a better life. I mean, I was just thinking what you actually related through there, because I remember years ago I was actually talking to someone from Lebanon. And he was actually telling me he had part of his life story. And when he was a young infant or a young boy, all he could remember is bullets whizzing past his head every 5 seconds, bombs exploding and everything else. And I'm just thinking back, should a child have to go through that? Shouldn't he be going to school? Shouldn't be having a good life in front of him, a promising future and everything else? And instead, no, that's all he saw was people, war around him all the time, destruction, everything else, and that's all he knew. So basically, it was just surviving day to day, or even hour by hour, And so he's basically coming in here shell shocked, and and also too the attitude of a lot of people. So, oh, well, you're here now. You can put that behind you. You can just move on. And you've got to fit into our way of life. And I mean, that is really hard if people are traumatized. And there is a lot of these countries that are quite traumatizing for a lot of people that come over here. So they're expected to all of a sudden be part of the community and everything else, but they're still actually trying to recover from being basically from the trauma they put up, being from a war-torn zone. Somalia is another classic example, but also Sudan and etc. and bring him over. But you got this attitude, oh no, lock them up. We've got to go through all this process and everything else. Well, hang on for a sec. Let's just see our role in all this from the starters. And yeah, they should be accepted in. We're not saying open the floodgates and let everyone in. No, it's not that. But I think they should be in. They're seeking a better life. And really, by rights and working class perspective, and I say this to all workers out there, they're no threat to us. They're no threat to our security, job security, our way of life. In fact, if we were actually so concerned about things, we'd be actually supporting them to improve their, to seek an improvement into their lives as well. They too are entitled to a secure life and everything else. And so we should be putting our hands out to them. Yeah, you are entitled to that, and we will support you all. Said 100%, instead of like putting this division amongst us as well. It's like old Karl Marx said once, workers of all countries unite, and we should be all banding together, like not just a whole set of workers in some countries getting the benefits and none else. Everyone should have them. We should be supporting everyone to seek security in that, and we should get back to that again. I mean, a kid should not have to grow up in abject poverty. They shouldn't have to grow up in war and then the threat of death every day put to them, or a gun to their head, growing up in all sorts of these things. They should be entitled to everywhere around this planet, entitled to a proper future in front of them, a good education and a good career ahead of them, so they can actually have a good, fruitful life, and they can also contribute to this planet as well. So, and I think that should be what we put forward to, instead of this whole thing of us and them and everything else, which seems to be the major parties. The two cheeks of the same backside want to throw at us all the time. And as well. So yeah, like you guys in the US, these Latino people should be supported in every way, and like here in Australia as well. And they understand that we need to stand united. In fact, the people who are the cause of all this problem are those that sit in Washington, those that sit in Canberra, and also the Eastern establishment, the banks, etc. They're the ones who are causing all this crap, for starters. So, yeah, and we need to actually do something about that, take it up and show some good solidarity and support.
Mm-hmm. One other thing, Dust, if I may?
Go ahead.
So I don't know if folks know, and a lot of folks may or may not know this, because I'm astounded how many people don't know this. Puerto Rico being a this is interesting. Puerto Rico being a colony of the United States, and I don't give a shit about the legal term that they're using now. It's a colony. We all know it's a colony. All right. All Puerto Ricans born in Puerto Rico are automatically U.S. citizens. Meanwhile, the United States continues to own Puerto Rico, and I always say colonialism is just slavery's little brother, right? Like nobody wants to be a slave. Nobody wants to be colonized, right? We had fucking wars all over the Americas because of colonialism. But so think about that for just a second. Every single Puerto Rican born in Puerto Rico is automatically a U.S. citizen, right? By birthright. In return, the United States gets to own Puerto Rico, all right? And then for many years, we had so that's Puerto Rico. For many years, the United States had the wet foot, dry foot policy with Cuba. What was the wet foot, dry foot policy? Ended with Obama. Basically, that is, let's say if you wanted to flee Cuba, if you were caught on wet land, right? If you were caught out there in the ocean, your ass was going to get sent back to Cuba. But if you were able to successfully get to dry land in the United States, the United States would give you refuge, right? The United States would give you refuge, and this was political. No other Latin American got this designation, this great designation of hey, come over. When you get here, we'll accept you. You're going to be good. Don't worry about it. We're going to take care of you. Nobody but Cubans did. Why? So you have to, and again, it's important to analyze imperialism and analyze what these folks do, because it's again, it's a political game that these people they Latin America is just to the United States. Latin America is still they believe they still own it. They still have that is still its own back, and they realize they're losing influence. They realize that there's news articles coming out now saying that of all these analysts who are dumbfounded over the fact that, wait a minute, what happened to the U.S. The U.S.'s influence in Latin America? Like, we're losing ground. Like, all of a sudden now there's this renewed attention to Latin America because, again, Washington has always had this idea that they could just do whatever the fuck they want with Latin America, and that's changing. But I just wanted to highlight those two examples there of, again, Puerto Rico being a colony and Cuba being our communist enemy, and how the United States uses immigration as a sort of an act of war against our people.
Very, very powerful comment, Victor. Man, I want to touch on that a little bit. It's essentially red carpet refugees, where they will love to have in the collaborators from Afghanistan. I know they was forced, but at the same time, they're all being welcome in. The Gusanos and from Cuba, the Contras from Nicaragua, the terrorists, they love to have right-wing terrorists. Ship them in, bring them here, bring in the right-wing terrorists. What they don't tell, what a lot of these, pro-immigration, liberals, which is kind of disgusting, because the majority of people don't want to leave their homes. Oh, it's great. The United States is the best country in the world. Immigration's so wonderful. All these great people are coming in and making our culture more diverse and all this stuff. What they're not talking about is people were facing death and absolute poverty because of their imperialist policies. So this whole immigration, such a good thing, is a real insult. The people that were forced and had risked lives and almost died on the border. I'm not trying to say I'm not trying to say we should be oppressed of the immigrants, because if you oppress immigrants, what is the result? You have a people of living in the shadows, fearing their lives, can't organize, have less rights. That drives down wages and makes things even worse, for both those folks. But then what I'm getting at with this, what the pro-immigration liberals, what they don't talk about is all of these red carpet refugees were at the January 6th movement. The Gusanos were out there, Contras were out there. They like to say it was all, like backwards hillbilly Trump supporters. But you had the anti-Chinese immigrants, You had, you had Gusanos, you had the Contras. That is a part of the far right terrorist movement, are these red carpet refugees in this country. And honestly, I don't like these people and don't want them. and, Gusanos and what have you. I mean, it's good that they're leaving Cuba because they were bad there, and it's good they're leaving Nicaragua. But then they, and the Center for Political Innovation recently did some networking with the Nicaraguan government. The Nicaraguan government was there in New York City to, for the UN, and they went to a church. A lot of people don't know this about Nicaragua. They're a Christian socialist government. So they gave a speech in the church, and in the church, Caleb Maupin and others, we handed them our latest book, Jesus Was a Socialist, which is a manual on how to reach religious peoples and talk about them with socialism. And then why they were doing that, and they showed up there, shout out the Flame of Revelation. He was there with the FMLS. I don't remember the name, the Nicaraguan flag, the revolutionary flag. He was there. And while the church service was going on, you had the Contras walk into this church and try to disturb the Nicaraguan speech. And the people from the Center for Political Innovation stood up and shouted those people out of the church and removed those people from the church. It's absolutely disgusting. A lot of these folks. So I'll continue on with it. I actually had a point that I didn't get to talk about, and that was on this specific issue. Maybe we could talk a little bit more on immigration. I really like, this topic. The Center for Political Innovation has a solution to forced migration, because it really is forced migration, and it's not a good thing for, the brain drain from these countries, people leaving their countries and and destroying how all the workers come here, I mean, you got remittance coming in, and that's a good thing. But essentially, this forced migration thing is bad for the countries there, and it's bad for, and it's largely bad for the United States in a lot of ways. I'm not like talking about, I think multiculturalism is good, but a lot of people don't say it really does. Even Cesar Chavez said this. It does drive down wages to an extent in the United States, and that's not a good thing. And there's some chaos and trouble with it. I mean, but the answer to it is solidarity, and each one, an injury to one is an injury to all. Lift up the least among us, and that's how we raise wages. And the Center for Political Innovation solution to immigration is the Zabata Sandino economic corridor. And what this is, it means economic development and national liberation for Latin America. And you can see this with the Nicaraguans who are building infrastructure, Sandino, who are lifting people out of poverty, who they got this stance there that says, in Nicaragua, there's a good stance that says, grow where you're planted. And there was this big thing, urban, rural divide. And it was a thing to make life better in the countryside and make the people who produce the food and producing food sovereignty for the Nicaraguan people to stay there and have, a good life and have the infrastructure and the resources needed. And we got AMLO, who's building the Mayan train, who's doing a lot of public works progress. And the solution to forced migration is economic development and national liberation of Latin America and South America. One of the things I didn't get to touch on, I think we're going to have another round with this, was this really hits home. So Obama said that he was going to close Gitmo. He ran on that. It never happened. There's still people being tortured there. So recently, Biden is signed contracts, has already started to use Guantanamo Bay as a detention facility for primarily Haitian migrants, because it has a legal limbo. So they weren't allowed to torture people if it was U.S., land. So they can torture them there because it's not technically the United States. So a lot of the same stuff that applied to the people they tortured, just random people. They weren't even terrorists. A lot of these people had no connection to terrorism. They tortured them. A lot of that same legal limbo is going to affect the conditions of the Haitian migrants. They can keep them in worse conditions. So, this whole thing with Trump, with kids in cages, and recently with the horrible conditions we've seen in the migration facilities here in the United States, there's going to have even worse conditions. And this is a Democratic president who is turning Guantanamo into a migration detention, a prison camp of people who have the legal right to apply for asylum. I mean, it's absolute discussion. I know I said a lot there, Victor. Anything you want to respond to before we continue?
No, I mean, Guantanamo Bay should not even be a thing. It's not. It doesn't make any sense. Again, this is just another way for folks in Washington to just they think they own Latin America. They think they own the Caribbean. America has no business having a piece of Cuba. Period. Period. Go to Puerto Rico. At some point in Puerto Rico, you will have it's inevitable. You will have a revolution, and the first thing that should happen is that all American interests and all American corporations should immediately be leaving once Puerto Rico becomes a state, and then only be allowed to return on Puerto Rico's terms. So, I mean, there's not much I have to say there about that. The whole thing is absolutely absurd. It's ridiculous. It's a sham. The whole world knows it. Guantanamo Bay should not be a thing. I do want well, let me stop there. I do want to respond to something you said about immigration. I just want to highlight something. I don't know if I could say it now or.
Go ahead.
Okay. So there was on August 2nd, there's an article in the New York Times, lack of foreign workers as seasonal businesses scrambling. Even with a visa cap increased, the pandemic's disruption has left a dearth of landscapers, crabbers, and restaurant help. And I encourage folks to read that article. Again, I always say there's utility in everything. I know the New York Times is a liberal media publication. I have no illusions about that. That being said, I don't know, mate. I know you mentioned Chavez and his quote about driving down wages. What this article does is it highlights the fact that there are jobs. I'm sorry, there are jobs that Americans don't want to fucking do. Period. That's what the article highlights. And the only ones willing to do the work are, I'm gonna say it, my people. You know what I mean? Like it's just a reality. And so I don't know if maybe that there was a time when maybe that was the case, and you can make that argument based off of certain data. I think the times have changed, and I think that this even in this new fake American economy, you still have folks that just don't want to do certain work. Period. And it's going to take some people from Guatemala, from Honduras, from Mexico to do that work because they will do the work. And so, I encourage folks to read that article. There's a lot in there, but yeah, I mean, there's just a reality that, Latinos come to this country and they pick the berries, they work in factories, they take care of people's babies, they do the landscaping, they cut your grass, they go and do construction or plumbing inside your house, I just, again, without undocumented workers in this country, if we were to remove every single undocumented worker, overnight, this economy will collapse. Period. Period.
Very powerful. I think, man, I don't think we have a disagreement here. I think that's very true. Brown people, Latin American raza, do some of the worst, horrible paying jobs that build this country. Agriculture. I shared a meme that showed an agricultural worker whose arms were the bridges, and on those bridges were the trucks with the food. And the food is the building blocks of our society, and the way farm workers are treated is absolutely disgusting. And they are the building blocks that make this entire economy possible and necessary.
Yeah.
Now, my response is that I want those jobs to be well-paying union jobs.
Yes.
Yes.
I want those jobs
Yes.
to be higher paying jobs, you know? And I think, well, you can't just, you're not going to deport those people. I think we should raise the wages of the workers.
Right.
If you raise the wages, that might change the demographic eventually of those jobs. And, people shouldn't be fleeing this stuff to begin with. And Mexico should be prosperous. Nicaragua should be prosperous. So, I mean, people shouldn't be fleeing to begin with. I mean, the New York Times has a slant. You kind of get where they're trying to get there with it, meaning, having low wage workers is good because, they're going to improve we'd be nothing without these low wage workers, which is true, but they shouldn't be getting paid low wages. They should have high wages, and we should work to raise their wages, and we should work to stop imperialism from destroying those countries.
Yeah.
I mean, you get where I'm coming from. I wasn't, go ahead.
Yeah. The art. What's interesting about the article, and I see the Flame of Liberation. How you doing, brother? So in the article, they mention how, they're looking for workers to fill these jobs. They actually raise the wages. Now, of course, they're not to the standards that we think they should be, but they still tried to raise the wages. And no one still was doing those jobs. No one still was picking up those jobs. So then, again, they had to address that issue with immigration and offering certain reasons. But no, you're right, 100%. These should be unionized. These are good jobs. Yeah. These should be unionized jobs with very high wages, 100%.
Yeah. All right. So, while we're talking about Latin America, I want to talk a little bit about El Salvador, and specifically the interesting president, to say the least, has adopted cryptocurrency as the official. You got to go, or you got
something to say? 1 minute. I've just got to disagree.
Go ahead.
I'll be back.
Okay, you'll be back in a minute.
Okay.
All right, good. So I want to talk about El Salvador. El Salvador was using US dollar as its currency before this happened. El Salvador, was destroyed by Reagan in the Civil War. Has been kept in poverty. There was massacres. There's massive gang problems. These gangs, backed by the United States, who are laundering the money and selling them the drugs. Gangs are an agent of imperialism. Gangs keep countries in poverty. And I want to talk a little bit about crypto. This is interesting. They adopted crypto. Now, believe it or not, Cuba actually partially adopted crypto to help stabilize their currency. And, so why are you going to be against the country? Why are you going to be against crypto if even Cuba is doing something? Well, there's another issue about crypto is it was outright banned by China. And there's something interesting that, academics and liberals like to praise Cuba for having, advancements in organic agriculture in the special period. And I think it was amazing what Cuba did with advancements in organic agriculture. But what the liberals are not telling you is it was forced on them because of the horrible conditions they face. And if you look at China as an anti-imperialist power, they have the power to actually do things that most benefit their people. So China and their agriculture is coming up with the most advanced AI for developing their agriculture. And I think the reason why the liberals like to praise Cuba is because of the green austerity movement. And the green austerity movement is the name of global warming. They're just using that to further push the screws to working people and push imperialism and push the countries who haven't been using coal or oil for all these years. Oh, they're not allowed to use it. But the United States got rich on using oil and became the imperialist power off using coal and oil, but they can't do it to lift their people out of poverty. So, I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. So I think crypto kind of goes along with this. The Cubans are in a bad situation. El Salvador is in a bad situation. And, their currencies are being pushed in the ground by imperialist currency manipulation policies. They all want to blame China about that, but the fault really is the United States. The way they use the petrodollar. Any country like Gaddafi wanted to get off the petrodollar, destroyed. Saddam wanted to trade in the euro, destroyed. The way they back up the petrodollar with these invasions and wars, and they devalue. That's part of the way. That's part of the reason why everything is produced in the global south, and they're not given the money for it. Is part of that mechanism is currency. Now, I think cryptocurrency should be rejected by socialists, and people in horrible situations. They got to do what they got to do. But I really think you should look at the country that is able to choose what to do is better for the people and not what's forced. And, we can talk about fictitious capital with crypto, but at the end of the day, it really is currency should be in the hands of the government, and the government should be socialist, and the people should control the banking and financial institutions and run them for their ways and their means. And China is a great example of that. Nationalized bank, 90% home ownership, 80% of those homes are paid off. Massive infrastructure spending, 3 times the GDP for the last 40 years. And disregard as far as, let's see, Victor, I said a lot there. Any response there?
Yeah, well, I've been following this. So the president of El Salvador is an interesting fellow. Now, to be, I want to be quote unquote. I'm not objective, but to be fair, he is still sitting on about a 70% approval rating. It's been dipping. The guy poses himself off to be this maverick with no ideology. He's not from the right or the left, and he's a two-bit hustler as far as I'm concerned. He's a capitalist, and he's things are starting to percolate there little by little. His influence is waning. His popularity is waning. I get daily updates from El Salvador from a Marxist professor, and so little by little, different feminist groups, labor organizations, certain the world of academia, those folks who are considered, I hate to use the term radical, but radical or revolutionary or progressive, they're starting to come around. Like there's a resistance there to this guy. Now, for folks who haven't been following, so this was one of his babies, is to be able to push Bitcoin, and he's been fast tracking it. The way they rolled it out, the way they've been explaining it, nothing really makes any sense. The people are not buying into it. People don't have much faith. They've done polls recently in El Salvador. People, the majority of the people are rejecting Bitcoin. The majority of people are not going to get involved with Bitcoin. They don't really understand how this thing is working or is going to work. The implementation has been terrible as well. A lot of technical glitches with the apps and whatnot. So it's been an absolute mess. Now I'm very neutral when it comes to I don't that's not my thing. I don't know much about it. I don't understand it. So I'm very neutral. Venezuela has adopted cryptocurrency. Cuba has recently adopted cryptocurrency. The way that Cuba did it was interesting, and I expect this from the Cubans. They have they have some sort of bank that's going to obviously oversee this whole thing, and their rollout is very methodical. And then little by little, they're giving people more bits and pieces of information, because you know what the Cubans are going to do. They're gonna want to control this stuff, is rightfully so. They can't let this thing get out of control. So the Cuban way, if you're following it, it's like very slow. It's like slow and steady and methodical, well thought out. In Venezuela, it's been helping tremendously, in the sense that obviously they're dealing with inflation, which again I agree with you, Dust. I believe a lot of the stuff is manipulated by the West. I know that to be true. But so it has helped in that way. The Venezuelans have also been very careful about how they do this. So I'm very neutral to this issue. But when we're talking about El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador, for folks who are curious about him, pay attention to what's happening there, because things are percolating. People are hitting the streets. People are protesting. People are organizing against this guy. While he still remains very popular, that's expected. I'm expecting that to change. And this nonsense of not having an ideology, it's some bullshit thing that he's pushing, that he's some sort of maverick that's going to come out of, that he's going to create this, somehow he's going to, with magic, he's just going to create a new economy and a new way of doing, quote unquote, doing business, if you will. It's bullshit. The guy's just he's a 2-bit hustler. So that's my take on the situation. Nayib Bukele is somebody who is very dangerous for Central America. Forget about just El Salvador, but Central America itself. He's invoked Simón Bolívar and tried to, he says he wants to create like this Central American union of, I don't know what the fuck. And what's also interesting about him is that, and this is weird. Washington is coming down on him. I don't know if this is theatrics. I don't know if he's doing something else that's really pissing off the Americans. I know he has cut deals with the gangs in El Salvador. So again, to be fair, to be scientific about my approach, gang violence or violence in general has gone down in El Salvador. That's a fact. All right, but he's also now he's militarized a lot of regions in El Salvador as well while he's doing this. So there's this weird pact that he has with the gangs, while at the simultaneously also putting more boots on the ground, if you will, to militarize certain regions of El Salvador. So this guy, again, he's a fascinating character, and I don't mean that as a compliment. I think the guy is eventually the guy needs to go away. One last thing, the judicial system. He's trying to purge the judicial system, and basically trying to get rid of the judges who are, I forget the exact age, but they're a certain age and then above. He's basically trying to get rid of all of those folks, and I think he may have already done that. But it's ageism, and so that even people, even within a capitalist democracy over there, even leftists are concerned about some of the stuff, right? It's the guy. The guy is just he's a complete mess, and he's making a mess of the country. And this is not going to end well. I could tell you that. It's just not. You could see the writings on the wall. He recently, one other thing, I promise. He recently tweeted, because people are saying, that he has these dictatorial behaviors and attitudes. He recently tweeted, I think it's still on his profile handle. It says something along the lines of the coolest dictator in the world, to try to make light of, quote unquote, light of the fact that people say that, he has aspirations of becoming a dictator. But this is the guy who's in charge of El Salvador right now.
Go ahead, Dave. We're actually way behind schedule, but go ahead, David.
I'm just trying to going back to Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. Just to make the two things like using Cuba and El Salvador for classic examples. I think we've got to understand with Cuba, they've actually have a centrally planned economy, right? It's planned, unlike El Salvador. It's probably not so much. So it's interesting because looking at the two different social systems we have here, we're one that's centrally planned is able to actually be control the outcome, where the other can't. They're up to the mercy of the market, and or I'll say, sorry to use that term, but that's what they're up to. They're up to the chaos of capitalist production, etc. So, and we'll see how things marry out. I wasn't aware of a lot of stuff that was happening in El Salvador, and I thank you, Victor, for bringing me up to date on that as well. But what we're seeing here is basically, you can look at what's much more successful. Okay, socialism in Cuba and capitalism in El Salvador. What one's going to be out the winner here? Well, us three here, we know what the answer will be to that. but it shows you a classic example. I mean, trading in cryptocurrency, yeah, there'll be definitely pros and cons with that as well. But I think with the socialist system, well, they can actually got control of the outcome. They can determine the outcome more than I'll say what a capitalist economy would be. Oh, that was my 10 cents worth on that. Oh, sorry, just had to say something.
You're right on. I think the whole I missed the whole reason I brought it up. I got onto it was before in El Salvador, the U.S. banks, had to launder the money to an extent of the narco traffickers and the gangs, and now you get cryptocurrency, and it's going to be less. They're not going to be able to regulate as easily, which will be a huge win for the gangs, which are already a problem in El Salvador.
There's a lot of talks about that and the connection between the state there in El Salvador and those gangs. There's a lot of talks about that.
All right, so we're a little bit behind. We have one more news issue. We might cut the interview short, or we might cut off the workshop. Let's go ahead and get this last news issue out of the way. I asked Victor to bring this up. The AUKUS, the Australia United K U.S. Military deal. Victor, maybe you can talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, well, so yeah, it's Australia, the UK, and the US, and this was just a little bit after another alliance was formed, which was the folks could Google this, the Quad, which is the US, India, Japan, and Australia.
Yeah.
I've been reading some news from China. China apparently seems to be a little bit more worried about Quad, but AUKUS is also a problem. And so, David, I would like for you to speak about that. But France seems to be concerned. I believe, their envoy or diplomat was recalled to France from the United States. Russia has also voiced concern. Obviously, China's all over this, and China's just really upset about both Quad and AUKUS. But Dave, I'll turn it over to you. Just to and again, this is the other thing that's interesting. The United States is downplaying this and saying, that these aren't really military alliances. These aren't really, but they clearly are, right? And so they're downplaying this and saying, oh, this is not a big deal. This is not, they're really, really trying to downplay this. And the rest of the world is looking at this like, what the fuck is going on? Specifically places like China and Russia. But David, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, well, let's just look back a lot over the last since the start of the year. There was a big meeting of world leaders in Cornwall in England. There, obviously, our Prime Minister Scott Morrison attended. Oh, I've got an echo there. Is that right? Is that okay now? I was just hearing an echo before. There was. Anyway, Scott Morrison went over. He wasn't part of that leaders. I think it was something to do with the European leaders and the US and Canadian leaders went to it. But obviously went over there. What we didn't know at the time, there were actually talks behind the scene to form this. Was it AUKUS? Well, obviously, Australia at that particular moment, we had a big contract with the French naval company to build 12 submarines. They were actually non-nuclear submarines. So we have defence capabilities here for Australia. Keep in mind that we are an island nation. Obviously, we've got an ageing submarine fleet. We're about 40 years old now, and obviously need everything up to date. There was all these deals finally done. Actually, in the next few years, the project was to start kicking off there in Osborne Park in Adelaide in South Australia, employing thousands of workers. So I know that for a fact because my union covers a lot of those workers that work in naval dockyards. And yeah, that was going to be a huge project. Anyway, pretty much over the course of the last about 3 weeks ago, there was an announcement, man, the Australian government's ditching that contract, cost us $66 billion worth of taxpayers' money to cancel it, and then we're going to buy these nuclear powered submarines from the US. Now, if they're going to be built here is going to be another question. I don't know. I don't know the whole details and anything. But what, in fact, it's done is basically rid of any type of sovereign defence capability Australia has and just hand it over completely to the US defence. We do not have that now. It's all entwined in that US US war defence system, and that's what exactly is. So we're talking about sovereignty and struggle for our own. And look, I'll say every country's got a right to its own defence, not to its attack or its war, but just to defend itself, right? But the fact is, at the end of the day, we're now entwined with that completely, complete control. When we're talking about the commander of the Allies in the Pacific, Washington or Pentagon is the commander of that, not Australia at all. We're all entwined with it. Interesting, New Zealand's not part of it because they actually, one thing that helps them is a non-nuclear policy they have. They don't allow nuclear power ships into their waters. And interesting, Canada's not involved in that either. We've got the other one, Quads. It's exactly right. Well, let's see how it do. It'll be interesting to see how events turn out in India as well, because if they do have a change in there's actually a lot of big strikes and revolt happening in India at the moment. Things could possibly change over to China's favour. And yes, of course, China's got concerns. Not only that, we should have concerns here because China's our biggest trading partner. Why the hell, and over the course of the last 12 months, when Trump, interesting, it was about early last year, Trump went on a full war footing against China, accusing them of all sorts of things from creating COVID, from inventing COVID right through to other things and delivery. China this, China that. China's to blame. Basically the sun didn't come up today, or it was raining. Oh well, China's to blame for it. This whole anti thing, it was basically there to demonise China for everything you can think of. And guess what? Our federal government followed suit without question. They got their orders. You follow suit. Yes, sir, we will follow suit. And this has actually harmed a lot of trade relations between us and China. And obviously now iron ore's in the question, which is one of the biggest natural raw commodities we do send to China. But also at the same time as well, other diplomatic relations between Australia and China. And it put this whole fear like this China's a threat to us all the time. Well, China's never attacked us. They've gone to war against us. The last I looked, yes, sure, they might have a few things. I might Chinese company own a few things, some land, but they're actually a minority. Most of the big stakeholders in land, agriculture, and other industries is the US, UK, Japan, and the European countries. China's actually a small percentage of that. So, I mean, and then to blame them because of all, a lot of our manufacturing work going off to China. That wasn't China's fault. That was current and previous governments here in Australia allowing us to move our material conditions, our manufacturing down in order for doing that. So, in all of this, what's also creating for Australia is one big natural military base or aircraft carrier to launch any attack onto China in the future if ever happened the case, which actually should be very concerning for everyone that lives in this country. There's no way we win. And we just said, basically, we're basically used and abused in such a way, well, we're going to be the guinea pig, we're going to be the sacrifice in this in order to the benefit of major multinationals around the world. So, and it is a quite concern, and I think actually people don't realise it, but the fact is, at the end of the day, if we're talking about our own sovereignty, our own direction for independence for Australia, well, now that's up under further threat because of this as well. And basically, I want to ask a question. Why can't Australia develop its own peaceful foreign policy without having peaceful relations with its current neighbours around the place, especially here in the Asia-Pacific region? This is, which we can easily do instead of being dictated to by Washington, London, or Tokyo, etc.
Very, very powerful. We've been talking about this a lot on Working Class Revolt, and we've talked about the idea of Australia being, escaping U.S. imperialist influence, having more, national authority as a country, and then in its interest, trading more with China and actually shifting to the anti-imperialist bloc, benefiting Australia and the Australian workers to a point. And this really puts a hamper in that. The Australia don't even got its own military anymore. If they had coups. I mean, there was soft coups in Australia carried out by the United States. There was a social democrat. What was his name? David, the social democrat that had a coup performed against them in Australia.
Oh, Gough Whitlam.
Yeah, Gough Whitlam. They actually had a democratically elected president in Australia who the U.S. performed a coup against.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about Australia ain't even got its own military anymore. If a civilian government wanted to work more closely with China, the military itself, controlled by the United States, could stop it from happening. That's absolutely disgusting.
Yeah.
And this also goes into we're doing a study on the Foundations of Leninism, and it says there's three major contradictions. One, the contradiction of capitalist and proletariat, the contradiction of oppressor nations and oppressed nations, and those are the main ones we organize around. Victor has a focus on the oppressed and oppressor nations. But what the third one that people don't even talk about is the contradiction between the imperialists themselves can be used and manipulated for the benefit of the working class struggle. And another thing that happened with this AUKUS deal is the French were going to sell conventional submarines to Australia. And with this deal, they said no to the French. Now they're buying nuclear submarines from the United States, and I understand that also had negative labor consequences.
Yeah.
That David was talking about. If you want to go ahead with that.
Yeah, well, look, under the French, with the agreement with the French company and the French government, well, most of it, a lot of it was going to be manufactured here in the Osborne Park Naval Dockyard, or Submarine Naval Dockyard there in Adelaide. Now, which would obviously directly and indirectly employed a lot of people at the same time. Now, in fact, no one knows what in this deal is currently what consists of the one with the US government. Now, are we going to buy them just directly? Because interesting. We don't have a very big nuclear industry here in Australia. We've got Lucas Heights, which is almost scientific reactor. Yes, we've had uranium mining, and that's pretty much about it. We don't actually have any big nuclear capabilities here in Australia as well. So to actually have people trained up in that area is a huge task. Now, would it be they're going to build it all here and train people up? Somehow I don't think so. Regardless of who's in government, Labor or Liberal, I'm sure most of it will be manufactured over there. And most people here, they may be able to fit out a few little things, and then off it goes. And say, oh, it had some local content in there, which would be very small. Or it could be just completely, we'll send people over there. Okay, this is how they operate, train people up. But by then, and I think I know we all should know, they probably will be built in the US, and then we're just being bought here on the detriment of other jobs. Now, I'm not trying to promote like defence industry or whatever as a great leap forward, but civilians are employed in that industry, and yes, and it's all unionised area as well, and so obviously you've still got to fight for their rights and everything else. But this shows you too the social ramifications on the ground. But those people are not working. Well, then the offset things, you've got local shops closing down because people aren't having the money to buy anything. And as a flow-on effect, one way or the other. And like I said, we talk about too, basically our military being tied with the US one now, tied to it completely, is one thing. But also too, this takes the social costs of what's happening locally on the ground amongst the workers as well. And the fact is, who's paying for all this? Working class people, once again, regardless of what you look like, where you're from, whatever, we're paying for this. I don't see the major multinationals and banks paying for this at all. We'll be coughing it up our own pockets. So, and in the long term, this is just going to basically send the Australian economy back further into hundreds of billions to trillions of dollars in debt in the future. Well, future generations which will not be able to pay off at all.
Absolutely disgusting. I mean, Australian people should be building high-speed rail and infrastructure and hospitals, not flipping the bill for U.S. imperialist aggression against China. Victor, sorry I cut you off there. Go ahead.
Oh no, yeah. So just so here's an article from the BBC News. AUKUS could trigger a nuclear arms race, says North Korea. So here's North Korea condemning this new pact between the U.S., UK, and Australia, again known as AUKUS. A foreign minister from North Korea said the AUKUS deal would upset the strategic balance in the Asia Pacific region. And then here's another article here from So this is from my Chinese daily app, and so AUKUS nuclear submarine deal brings 5 harms to region, says Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. So I just wanted to read this very quickly. This is 5 points that he highlighted. He said, first, it will cause a risk of nuclear proliferation. According to the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, non-nuclear weapon states can only use nuclear energy in a peaceful manner under supervision and safeguard. So he also mentions that as a first point. The second was the same point that was mentioned in the article mentioning the North Korean position, which it will introduce a round of arms race. Third, it will undermine regional prosperity and stability. Fourth, it will sabotage the building of a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Southeast Asia region. And the fifth point he made was it will revive the Cold War mentality. There's other pieces that I've read that China's also invoking or not invoking. They're saying, hey, this is also now, they brought pretty much race into the matter, saying this is basically like an Anglo-Saxon pact, right, which is threatening us folks out over here in the Asian world, Asian Pacific world. So there's a lot of layers to this. There's a lot of reason for concern. And I don't know how much. Again, how often is the American worker talking about this or thinking about this, right? And the fact that the United States is intentionally trying to downplay it, when this is a world major event, as far as I'm concerned, and really, I mean, forget I'm concerned. I mean, this is objective, right? Like, Quad and AUKUS, these are two things that the entire world should be paying attention to. It's dangerous.
It is.
Yeah. Very powerful. So I believe we do not have time to do an interview on our show.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it later. We'd love to have you back on, Victor, in a few months.
Yeah.
And maybe we can get your interview in then. We got about 4 minutes left. Maybe we can do a very short workshop and then a few closing statements. I wanted to get, since we had a self-proclaimed third worldist on the show, we wanted to work on our points of unity, what is it that we agree on? And I think the Marxist-Leninists, especially in the United States and Australia, really agree that we're not a fan of social democratic imperialism. And there's a lot of confusion about that. So we're going to do a little bit of a workshop. I'm going to pretend to be a Bernie Sanders social imperialist for a second. And then I'm going to have Victor, I want you to tell me why I'm wrong. All right, Victor. Hey, why are you always talking about Cuba and China and all those evil communist countries that have genocide and all that bullshit? Why you always talk? Why can't the United States just be like the Scandinavian countries, like Denmark? They got healthcare over there. Won't that improve conditions here? Why don't we just be like them instead?
Well, first of all, when we're talking about genocide and we're talking about mass murder, I charge U.S. imperialism with being the number one purveyor and in perpetrating mass murder all over the world. There is no greater evil than U.S. imperialism. Period. What China is doing is not, China is not going into Latin America or Africa to threaten Africans or threaten Latin Americans and saying that we're going to invade your country, which the United States has done in places like the Dominican Republic, in places like Guatemala, in places like Chile, etc., or support dictatorships in places like Brazil in the 50s or Chile after they deposed of democratically elected socialists. China's not doing that. As far as what's happening in places like China and Cuba, those are sovereign nations. They're allowed to determine the type of political and economic system that they want, and they have already determined that's their and if you look at China, China has raised over 800 million people out of poverty. Cuba's not a same. Cuba has free education, free healthcare, the most doctors and most teachers and medical professionals and educators per capita in the entire region. This idea that we should be a Western imperialist nation, that we need to look towards the West and we need to look towards European models. No, the third world will continue to find its own path and create its own political and economic system, regardless of what the United States or the West has to say or think about it.
Very, very powerful and well spoken. Maybe so do you think that the Scandinavian countries are imperialist? And the social democratic countries are. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I believe that you have a whole combine that's never that the entire West leeches off of Africa and the Asiatic world and Latin America. It needs all the entire West needs the third world to produce its material reality and its material wealth. And so, yes, the entire West is all the former colonial powers are imperialist. That's a fact. That's an objective fact.
All right, Comrade Fox, how do you? I think Comrade Victor did good about defending anti-imperialist countries. Comrade Fax, maybe talk about some of the problems with the social democratic imperialist European model.
Well, even so, it's not so dissimilar here in Australia either. And I think what you don't understand is the social democracy. Well, it is capitalist ideology. It's the other arm of capitalism or imperialism, and it's basically its interest is there to try and tie the workers to the system of imperialism. And at the end of the day, too, even those workers in the so-called call the Western countries, just to use that as a terminology, and include Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and US, and Europe. The fact is, at the end of the day, it's basically only to tie us to it. But what we're going to come to realise for us workers in these countries, what's given to us now is going to be taken off us, which we're seeing right now. It's happening. I'm using that term. There's a good book I would recommend, Brother Bill Mackay, who actually was instrumental in organising United Auto Workers in the 1930s. He was a communist. And he used that, and he came to that realisation: what's given to us now is going to be taken off us very quickly as well. And we've seen that. And the fact is, too, what we want to understand, it wasn't social democracy that gave us these great conditions. It was because of the back of the struggle of the Soviet Union and many other socialist countries to stop us from going towards socialism. The fact is, with healthcare, education, and other types of secure jobs and that, yes, and it was actually through some struggles here as well, we managed to achieve that. But actually, because of the back of that, to stop us from going to revolution and overthrowing it. That's why social democracy has come into being to keep us tied to that capitalist system. And I know we did that work on the history of the Third Internationals, and that was really played the role of what happened there. And where our job is to actually move the workers away from that social democratic role now and back into a communist socialist one ideology again, because realising now material conditions are changing very quickly and very rapidly, now more so than what happens in the 1950s. And we've got to understand it's no longer our friend. And it was actually used deliberately there to divide the working class internationally. Basically to saying, well, basically to keep us divided and bought off. And we now need to, because material conditions have changed, we need now to get in there saying, no, our workers, our interests are the same as workers from, say, from Africa, from Latin America, from Asia, etc. We're all in the same boat together, and we need to get that unity back into move human history from capitalism, imperialism to socialism.
If I was going to respond to that, I think I'd have to start off simply as being, before we even get into economics, if people just from a human being, humanitarian standpoint, the imperialist bloc, imperialism led by U.S. imperialism, is the greatest enemy humanity has ever faced. This group of monopoly capitalists, this group of banking cartels, they not only exploit people here but the absolute devastation and the humiliation that has been done to oppressed nations is absolutely disgusting. And any peace-loving humanitarian, anybody that gives a shit about humanity at all will say death to imperialism, down with the imperialist system. It's absolutely disgusting that they're treating human beings for the profits of the few monopoly capitalists. Now that would be my first response to that. And then I get more into an economic standpoint. And I think I love the way Victor, emphasizes the, oppressed nation and oppressor nation contradiction, which is arguably the main one today. But I think looking at the system and you see all of the contradictions, the worker and capitalist contradiction, and even the contradictions among the imperialists. And you come to realize imperialism is, monopoly capital. You got this one group of these bastards on top, they're fucking over workers here and then fucking over the oppressed nations, even worse. And this system is in decay. I mean, we look back to, when the Soviet Union was a threat, FDR, and it was the communist movement. As David said, I love the way David said this. It was communists fighting to get these workers health care. It wasn't the Social Democrats that actually won Social Security, that actually got the labor aristocracy into place. It was communist organizers who won that benefit because the capitalists gave in because they saw it in their interest to have a labor aristocracy. Okay, so now we're in the decline. We're in declining moments of imperialism. All the contradictions are intensifying. So I don't think this time when the people start to realize as conditions get worse, I don't think the imperialists have enough money to reestablish the labor aristocracy anymore. The white picket fence, the labor aristocracy in the United States is not coming back. They don't have the money. They no longer have the political clout and control. The third world is standing up against them. And it's time that we switch sides. And it's time we stand with the third world and push up against the monopoly capitalists. Not only is it the economic thing to do, it's the right thing to do as human beings. Let's see, David Fox, I saw you. Maybe we'll have both of y'all can do a round of concluding thoughts, and we'll go ahead and end it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Look,
David.
I typed it in the host chat there. I highly recommend a book, Social Democracy, The Enemy Within by Harper Bra. He's one of the founding members of the Communist Party, Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist. Highly recommend that book and the role social democracy has done, because the fact is us here in Australia, we can say the conservative, well, all right, let's look at the two cheeks. The conservative side of politics, yes, they've attacked workers and workers' interests over the years, but also equally, social democracy has as well. And they've actually been involved in a lot of union busting over the years, a lot of other smashing the workers and that, and led a lot of betrayals amongst the workers. So besides tying workers to the system, they've also at the same time able to beat us as well for union legislation through to direct smashing of picket lines a whole lot. And it's a very, even though that book I was just mentioned is more relevant for the UK, especially during the miners' dispute, but you look at the role of the Labor Party over there, also Social Democratic Party, what they've been leading. It's not to say like every member of that Labor Party and even he is any bad, but I just got to give you the whole idea that psychology, the philosophy of social democracy, it can be the enemy within. And yes, it has been involved in smashing worker struggles here in our respective countries as well.
All right, Victor, any final thoughts? I know we've gone a little bit too long. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. Any final thoughts? I don't. China's not going to be able to be stopped. The Latin American Revolution that we're seeing take place right now, it's not going to be able to be stopped. anti-imperialists within the imperial core, communists within the imperial core, have to continue to organize. And so, this may be a shock to some people, because some people will again have this caricature of what their world is are like. That's not necessarily the case when it comes to folks like me. I've always been an organizer. I've always been an activist. So yes, we have to fight. And yes, you're seeing the contradictions heighten and be accelerated. And this idea that you can't have revolution in the United States is absolutely ludicrous. So if you were to say in 1956 in Cuba that revolution was out of the question, that it's impossible, then what's the point, right? Like what would be the point, right? To be if that's the whole point of being a communist, being a revolutionary, is that your job is to do revolution, to create a revolution. So I will say this in talking to my elders and whatnot, in the 60s and the late 60s and early 70s, they also thought they were going to have a revolution back then. So we can't underestimate the imperialists. We can't underestimate the ruling capitalist class. They will try to push the analogy I use is they're going to try to push certain levers to try to reform, quote unquote, reform the system, whether that be pure aesthetics or aesthetics with actual, material crumbs that they continue to throw to the working class. We'll see. But for sure, the contradictions continue to accelerate, and we have to take advantage of that. And this is a good time to be at the forefront of all this, to be ahead of all this, and to try to explain to people using forums like this, organizing in the community. I keep telling people you have to join an anti-imperialist organization. If you don't like the ones that are out there, create one. And yes, we have to be allied with the people of the third world. China is, as far as I'm concerned, China is my friend. As far as I'm concerned, the Latin American revolution that's taking place, I'm not only am I reading about it, I'm only am I learning about it, but I try to make the connections and the ties, and try to network with folks in Latin America all the time. And so I think that's the job also of being an internationalist, right? So yeah, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the conversation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to end it there. Thank you, everyone.